Jewish Insights with Justin Pines on JBS is made possible in part by the clubs at Pearl River, New York, luxury rental communities for ages 55 and better, now leasing Phase 3 at the Reserve, and the B.L. Manger Foundation.
הנה מה טוב ומנועים שבת אחים גם יוחד הנה מה טוב ומנועים שבת אחים
Shalom and welcome back to Jewish Insights, where we're going to be in part 2 of this amazing discussion with Rabbi Ken Spiro, the author of this book, Crash Course in Jewish History, and who's literally been giving us a crash course in Jewish history. If you haven't seen part 1, I recommend you check it out, and this is part 2. We left off during the Roman control of Jerusalem and Israel. King Herod is in power, just built this magnificent and massive temple, and things are going to start to crumble. Pick us up. Here we go.
Exactly. So Herod is in power, which is, like Dickens says in A Tale of Two Cities, the best of times and the worst of times. Pax Romana, things are basically quiet, but the Romans are oppressive. Mm-hmm. We Jews always have had a tumultuous relationship with the pagan world. At this time, there's no other monotheistic faiths. Christianity is born at this time, by the way. Begins as an offshoot of Judaism, as a huge topic, and later basically breaks away into a completely separate faith hundreds of years later. But it's just us versus the pagan Roman world power. You read Greek and Roman historians, and this is a historical period now. We don't have historians writing the time of Abraham, but once you get to the Herodotus, Thucydides, we have all these Romans who are writing, Cassius Dio, Cicero, all these different Romans and Greek writers are talking about their world and also talking about their interaction with the Jews, which is uniformly like, who do these people think they are? Mm-hmm. We talked about Judaism being politically incorrect previously, in that from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Christianity, we're the only people believing in one God. And we're telling the whole rest of the world, which is all religious but polytheistic, you're all wrong.
Are we so powerful that people are like, what do you mean we're telling the rest of the world?
We're not saying you're wrong,
right?
But we're
just sticking to our gods.
But in the ancient world, you swapped gods like baseball cards.
Right.
Like if you, as someone of North Africa, and a Carthaginian, you go to Athens, you go worship in the temple of Athena,
right?
The Parthenon.
Right.
Jews are like, no, we're not going to worship. No, only one God. That's idolatry. We're not going to eat your meat. We're not going to drink your wine. We're not going to marry your women. We're not going to worship your gods. This comes across as very arrogant. Got
it. And you mentioned earlier in part 1 that at the time of Hanukkah, that was the first time where people didn't attack us for being Jewish. They didn't attack Jewish bodies. They attacked Jewish religion.
Right.
Was that also motivated by a severe disagreement with that? What was going on there?
I mean, within the Jews who instigate the revolt of Hanukkah, It's when Jews assimilate, Jews who stay religious often really bother them. I'm trying to assimilate, and they're like reminding the non-Jews that I'm Jewish kind of thing. That's an interesting PhD thesis to discuss. But in the case of the political interest of the Assyrian, the Seleucid Greek Empire, was they're on the border between us and our Greek brothers in Egypt, and they're not buying into our worldview. This is like a weak underbelly. Everyone else is becoming Greekified, and these people are not loyal.
Right.
Like,
so it's more than just religion. It's almost like a way of life.
It is. Judaism is.
Right.
They continue to worship their God. Everyone else is assimilating to what was the hottest, coolest culture in the world back then. Just like European and American culture is the big thing today that pulls people in. Mm-hmm. So too back then, Alexander, when he conquers, you have this Hellenistic culture, as it's called, which will be also very prominent in the Roman period that comes after the Greeks, is the dominant culture. And it's always luring Jews in. Jews, again, nothing changes. Jews thinking we got to get with the modern picture today and absorb into that culture.
Got it. Okay, and then catch up to the Romans. The Romans, is there a beef with the Jewish people that they're not worshiping pagan gods? Is that what's...
Well, there's an underlying current. The best place to look is Josephus, the great Jewish historian who lives in the 1st century, who records all of this stuff. But there's an underlying continuous tension between, as a subjugated people, and as the only subjugated monotheistic people in the world who are at odds with the larger pagan culture, which has been forced on top of them, is the background to what happens later. In the year 66, a revolt breaks out in Israel against the Romans, which is crazy because the Romans were like huge. They controlled the whole thing. Israel's not an insignificant people, but still, this is a major revolt. And
This is Bar Kokhba.
This is the Great Revolt.
Fine.
There's a Great Revolt from 66 to the year 70. And it's not a unified revolt. Not everyone in the country joins in. And even the Jews, like in Jerusalem, there's different zealot sectarian groups who are mostly religious nationalists that argue with each other, fighting amongst. Just because like all Jews are like Orthodox, they agree. Anyone knows the Orthodox world knows that within that there's a lot of divisions and disagreement. So these could be different nationalistic groups, religious Jews fighting amongst each other. So they're fighting each other and they're fighting the Romans at the same time. At this period of time, this is when Nero is the emperor. He sends in the Roman legions led by Vespasian and his son Titus. And there is a period of, from 66, a break in the middle because of political instability in Rome when the fighting ceases. But then by the year 70, Jerusalem is conquered by the Romans. They work their way through the country in the north, destroying anyone, leveling everything. The Romans, when they punished, boom. Yeah. They get to Jerusalem, they surround what's then called the Second Temple, the beautiful building that Herod rebuilt, in a city that's twice the size of the old city today. They systematically breach the defensive walls of the city, making their way onto the Temple Mount. And then on the 9th of Av, which is the 9th of the Jewish month of Av, which is the same date that the first temple was destroyed on, which is the date when the spies in the Bible came back before they entered the land of Israel and badmouthed the land. Right. We can't go into Israel, it's too hard. God says, you're crying on this day for no good reason. You could go in, I run the show. You just saw me destroy Egypt. Why do you think you can't take some Canaanite cities? Right. He says, you'll cry on this day for very good reasons. And we see the 9th of Av will echo through history as being the date on which, or very close to, most of the worst events in Jewish history will then fall out. And this is the second one, destruction of the Second Temple, 9th of Av of the year 70 of the Common Era.
Okay.
But by this time, unlike the first temple where all the Jews are living in Israel, we now have a diaspora community, which is the original outside the land of Israel community. Way before Brooklyn is Babylon. And that goes back, Jewish connection to Babylon is 2,500 years old. So Jews are in Babylon. So the Romans will destroy Jerusalem. A lot of Jews are killed. But this Jewish presence remains in the land of Israel. Jews will rise up. Now we're really fast forwarding through. If we get to the year 115 to the years 117, there's a second revolt, which may or may not have actually involved Israel, but involved the Jews living in the Eastern Mediterranean, where there was very significant Jewish communities in what is Cyprus, what is Turkey, what is all of the Middle East going into the Persian Babylonian area. And it's called Kitos's War, which could have been triggered by the invasion of the Persians into the Eastern Roman Empire. Persians and Romans always fighting each other, and neither was able to conquer the other one. And the Jews rise up in revolt within the Middle East, hoping that the Persians will succeed, because I'd rather live under Persians than Romans. They're nothing but bad news for us. It fails, and whole Jewish communities are obliterated. Like the Jewish community of Alexandria in Egypt, which was one-third Jewish, Alexandria in Egypt, on the Nile Delta. Kind of like Krakow and Warsaw were before the Holocaust, one-third Jewish. The Jewish community in Crete, the Jewish community in Turkey, wiped out. So that's another massive destruction. We have no evidence that the Jews in the land of Israel even fought. But then if we fast forward to the year 132 of the Common Era, during the time of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, possibly out of an attempt by Hadrian to build a pagan temple site on the site where the Jewish temple stood, which was actually built. A pagan temple site was built there, to Jupiter, or Zeus if you're Greek, same guy. That triggers the biggest revolt in the history of the Roman Empire, called the Bar Kokhba Revolt, where a massive, like basically guerrilla army forms around a guy by the name of Shimon bar Koziva, who we know as Bar Kokhba, which means son of a star. It's an allusion to his messianic potential, that he could be the one who could bring the Jews back. And this is a revolt. It took 4 Roman legions to crush the Jews in the year 66 to 70, about 45,000 men. We now know it took all or part of 14 Roman legions, which is half the legions of the Roman Empire, to crush Bar Kokhba revolt.
Wow.
Unbelievable revolt, the biggest revolt the Romans ever had to deal with. But the end of that revolt, which ended with the fall of the city of Beitar, south of Jerusalem, on the 9th of Av, and the death of Shimon bar Kokhba, and then the martyrdom of all these famous rabbis like Rabbi Akiva, who was one of the great rabbinic personalities who backed Bar Kokhba's revolt. That leads to the massive decimation of Judah. And this is the beginning of the end of the presence of Jews in Israel. There's never a period of time there's no Jews in Israel, but that population will shrink. The decimation is incredible. I personally hold that percentage-wise, not numerically, would be a great PhD thesis, that a higher percentage of Jews died between 66 and 135 than Hitler killed in the Holocaust. Hitler killed 1 out of every 3 Jews in the world between 1939 and 1945. I think it's probably 2 out of 3 Jews were probably killed in this period of time of 70 years in 3 massive revolts. Massive revolts.
Wow. So we have multiple times in history where like large chunks of the Jewish people are taken off the planet. Say a little bit around, you mentioned Rabbi Akiva. Just give me like the parallel story that's happening rabbinically during this time, if that makes sense. Again, on one leg, I know we're trying to move along here, but there's no temple. People aren't playing.
Right. So the temple's destroyed. So now Kohanim, priesthood, your family is out of a job.
Yeah.
They still preserve the bloodline, which, by the way, is genetically proven. That 75% of people who claim to be Kohanim have a genetic marker which seems to indicate they're descended from one male ancestor thousands of years ago. But now it's basically rabbinic Judaism, full out. And what's keeping the Jews together is the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Supreme Court. But at this point, there's on and off open persecution of Judaism and Jews, especially with Bar Kokhba. The Sanhedrin goes in and out of hiding. It moves, before the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70, the Sanhedrin was allowed, it's a very famous story, to move to a place called Yavna, as the Romans are surrounding the city. And it will move over the next couple hundred years from Yavna to Usha to Shfar'am to Beit Sha'arim to Tzipori to finally the city of Tiberias, named after the Roman Emperor Tiberius, who came after Augustus, which was a city founded by Herod Antipas on the Galilee. And there it will remain, and in the 4th century, it will cease to exist. This is several hundred years after the Bar Kokhba revolt. So now that central rabbinic authority that could decide for the whole Jewish world, that was the final word on everything, is no longer there, which is another huge... one of the great sub-stories of Jewish history is how we managed to adapt our faith and survive when all the basic institutions of Judaism, it's like the vital organs of a person's body. You got 2 lungs, you got the kidneys, you got 2 kidneys, a heart, big and small intestines. You can donate a kidney and you can live without a lung, but you pull the heart out, you're dead. I mean, how is it all the basic institutions of Judaism disappear? Rabbis are always there. The chain of transmission goes on, but the Supreme Court is gone. And that is the great story of the Torah being adaptable to the changing circumstances based on these principles that don't change, and enabling us to take it wherever we go as like a suitcase of wisdom and adapt it. And then you have separate rabbinic authorities and the breakup and the creation of different groups of Jews, Ashkenazim and Sephardim, and that's the tremendous multiplicity of Jewish, within the Orthodox observant world that we have today, that was the Jewish world afterwards. But by the time you get to the 4th century, Christianity, which starts out as a splinter sect of Judaism in Judea, has now separated completely and become a completely separate faith. The Roman Empire, which is split into Eastern and Western Roman empires, one in Rome and one in Constantinople, which is today Istanbul. Judea is part of the Eastern Greek-speaking Roman Empire, which is a Christian empire now. This is called Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire. And it's during this period of time, we're talking about the 4th and 5th centuries, the Jewish population has shrunk dramatically. Jews are fleeing elsewhere to get out of Judea. The tension is just not good anymore. And it's at this period of time when the Jewish population of Israel will shrink dramatically. Jerusalem will be there, but most Jews are living in the Galilee or down in the south, in Hebron area, and
other places around the world at this point.
Yeah, but this is when we have the great switch. Whereas initially the Jews were only in Israel, First Temple period. Second Temple period, you have a large diaspora community living outside, and during the Roman Empire, Jews start to move all throughout the Mediterranean. We have clear evidence of Jews living in Europe during the Second Temple period, and possibly even the late First Temple period. There's even tradition of possibly Jews being in Spain from the time of King Solomon. That's very hard to prove. But we find ritual baths and things in Europe from this period of time. So the situation in Judea is bad under Roman occupation. Jews will move out to greener pastures, North Africa, etc. But now we have the big transformation where the diaspora, we really have the scattering of the Jewish people around the world. But the central Jewish community will switch from what was Israel and Jerusalem to what is Babylon, Iraq. There'll be great yeshivas set up there, institutions of Jewish learning. And that will be, this is a period of time called the Gaonim, the great ones, who for we're talking about 500 years. This is when the Talmud is created. And all this creation of these books, the Mishnah, the Talmud, they're all created to enable us to not lose the ability to understand the original laws we got from Moses at Mount Sinai.
Our suitcase, as you
Our
said.
suitcase, right. It's the whole evolution. Meaning the core is the original conversation God has with Moses, which is added on to and adapted different situations as we go to different places. But the center of the Jewish world rabbinically will basically be in Babylon. Sura, Pumbedisia, these places are called. But you also have, but there's so many things going on, because if we fast forward to the 7th century, then we have the emergence of Islam. We already have one great offshoot of Judaism, Christianity, which is a child of the mother. The mother is Judaism. There'd be no Christianity without Judaism. And again, initially it was a splinter sect. Mm-hmm. The earliest Judeo-Christians were Jews who just followed a leader they viewed as a messianic personality, not the Christian definition of God's son. That's an idea that Judaism would never accept. But some political, spiritual leader who's a descendant of King David who can redeem the Jewish people and bring us back to the land of Israel. And then it breaks away and becomes a separate faith, which becomes, with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 4th century, the most powerful entity in Europe is the Roman Catholic Church.
Right. And just to make sure I understand that, right, there's like, I read about this before also, this idea that like there was kind of a lot of messianic energy in general around that time.
Yeah.
That came from a sense of desperation. Is that why things were so bad and like, you know, Jews were being destroyed, Romans were taking over, and it was kind of like there was a sense of Messiah's coming?
That's a great question. So messianism is a fundamental part of Judaism. The word Christ comes from Christos, the Greek word for anointed, which is the Greek version of Moshiach, which is the Hebrew word to anoint. And we see in the Bible that, like, starting with Moses, the special oil formula was used to pour on individuals and objects, like Samuel anointing Saul, or appointing the tabernacle, or your great-great-great-grandparents, you know, Aaron the priests. So the messianic concept is always in Judaism, but messianic expectation, he will come. That's the Jewish idea. It's a fundamental belief that eventually we return spiritually and physically, and the world lives in peace and brotherhood. But expectation of Messiah always waxes and wanes, and we see that messianism and false messiahs always will appear. It's like it's sine and cosine, inverse relationship. When things are at their worst, expectation is always at its best. Like the cavalry is going to come over the hill and save us. That's the period of time when Christianity emerges. Really dark period of Roman occupation and internecine fighting, and everything looks really, really bad. And okay, messianism, which is what Christianity emerges out of. And we see it at the time of Shabtai Tzvi, fast forward to the 17th century, you name it. It's always that time. Yeah.
All right, and then you were saying Babylonian Talmud is established. The Gaonim, give us the name of who are famous Gaonim?
Like Haigon, Sadyagon,
okay.
Shrira, there's all different Gaonim. But this is a period of time that ends about 1,000 years ago. And this is when the Persian Empire is Zoroastrian. Okay, so but in the middle of that period, what emerges out of Arabia, people have to understand that Arabs are not indigenous to the Middle East. Arabs are indigenous to Arabia.
Okay, what does that mean? Where's Arabia?
Arabia is where Saudi Arabia is, to the south. Okay, and working their way up the Red Sea area. Egyptians are not Islam will spread dramatically. It's a faith. It's not a national, unlike Judaism, which is a national religion. Islam is purely a religious identity. And if we fast forward till today, we see that Islam begins as a religion of nomadic Arabic-speaking people of the Arabian Peninsula in the early 7th century. But today, only 30% of Muslims are Arabs. It's spread everywhere. So they're not indigenous to North Africa, not to Tunisia, to Algeria, to Morocco, to what is called Egypt of today, not to what is Canaan or Israel of today, not to what is Lebanon, not to what is Syria, not to what is Iraq. Okay, these countries are all Islamic and most of them Arab today. But people always get confused about that. But out of the Arabian Peninsula, Muhammad, the founder of Islam, which corresponds to the year 622 as the official founding date of Islam, when he flees from Mecca to Medina. And after his death in 632, Islam will spread dramatically through the entire Middle East, taking over, literally, Islam is it's not just religious, not just like Islamic preachers converting. No, it's physical conquest of Islamic empires, of even the Persian Empire is taken over. And it becomes the dominant spiritual force. It will butt up against the Byzantine Christian Empire in the East. That'll last for a long time until eventually that too falls to Fatih the Conqueror, in talking about the conquest finally of in 1453. But
Wait, let me slow you down there. To what extent is the creation and origination of Islam in conversation with the Jewish people?
So that's interesting. The connection between Judaism and Christianity is much closer.
Right.
Because the original Christianity was an offshoot of one or more splinter sects of Judaism. And Jesus is a Jew. The narrative in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, you read the gospel narrative, is all taking place in Judea, in the temple, in the Sanhedrin, and the high priest. It's all in there. That's our story. And their Bible, the Christian New Testament, contains the Jewish Old Testament.
Sure.
Because you can't have the upper stories of the building without the lower stories. So it's in there. Islam, no, whereas Christianity today is overwhelmingly a bunch of pagans who eventually convert into the new faith and give up paganism and take this monotheistic faith of Christianity. Islam has no biological connection to Judaism, and Muhammad is not living in Judea. The Quran does not mention Jerusalem or Israel anyway, by the way. It's not mentioned anywhere. There is, in chapter 5, verse 21 in the Quran, a verse giving the land of Israel to Jews, by the way. Everyone forgets that one. Everyone should get the Quran and look at chapter 5, verse 21.
Okay.
But the Quran does not, it does have Jewish history in it, a little bit of it, albeit often not accurate. But it does have a very Jewish, it is like Judaism in that the conception of God is one. And it has laws in it. Christianity is creed over deed. There's no there's church law, canon law, but there's no like mitzvahs, there's no commandments. Islam does have 5 commandments, but it's not the same level of connection. But Muhammad was certainly influenced because he was a trader. He was running around on trade routes, like the frankincense route. He's interacting with Jews and Christians, so his ideas about faith are clearly coming from his interaction. So there is that connection, for sure.
All right, so Islam emerges and slowly starts to make its way north, I guess you said, conquering.
It's actually very fast.
Very fast.
Within 638, Muhammad dies in 632. By 638, the Muslims come to Jerusalem. They get to Egypt. They get to the entire Middle East. In 711, they conquer all of North Africa. 711, the date that all Americans know because of the convenience store. They cross the Straits of Gibraltar, where it's Tangiers in Morocco, and they go to Europe, and they conquer all a part of Spain for the next 700 years, which they called Al-Andalusa. So, and Jews will follow the Muslims as they expand.
Yeah, what happens with the Jews during
So
that time?
Jews will come in. Originally, you have a few Jews scattered in places in Europe, small communities. I mean, there's a Jewish community going back into Rome that predates the destruction of the Second Temple. We know that for a fact.
Right.
There are definitely Jews in Europe, but the populations are relatively small.
They're mostly in Babylon.
But the majority, the center of the Jewish world in terms of population, in terms of Torah knowledge, where you sent your questions to, albeit it could take years to get a response back then, was going to be the Gaonim in Babylon, these Shivas in Babylon.
Right. And then everywhere else, there's pockets of Jews in other places, including in Israel, probably Egypt, Europe.
Right. Because that's the Gaonic period till 1,000 years ago. And you have a 500-year period from about the year 1000 to the year 1500, which is called the period of time of the Rishonim, the first ones. This is just a chain of transmission, giving groups of rabbis different names.
Sure.
Not that there's already too much information, so I don't want to go into that too much, but during this period of time...
Just say some names of Rishonim.
Oh, Rashi, the Rambam, the Ramban, there's tons of them.
Okay.
But this is interesting because Jews will follow, just as Jews follow the Roman Empire as it expands in Europe. That's why we have Jewish communities looking for business opportunities. There's that funny line, why did God create Gentiles? Someone had to buy retail. Jews are the great middlemen of everything. We're always middlemen of knowledge, middlemen of goods and trade. The Silk Road was run by Jews going from Europe and the Middle East all the way out to China. All that Jews are always...
China finally makes its way into the story. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. China, the Jewish community of Kaifeng is over 1,000 years old.
Wow.
Iraqi Jews in Iraq trading out to the Far East, which took several years to get there and back. No LL flights.
So sit with me for a second there also. So, we didn't talk at all about economic motivations of Jews in part one of this or now. Now there's kind of this implicit thing that like part of what pushes Jewish movement is no longer, it's not a question of religious freedom, it's economic opportunity.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question because we'll see we get everywhere. We even have Jews out in Juneau, Alaska. They're called the Frozen Chosen. But they have, but what pushes Jews is grass is greener. Sometimes it's being thrown out. We'll see in Europe or Spain, being thrown out and going somewhere else. We're invited in. Or opportunities. As the Roman Empire expands into new territories and colonizes, Jews who have certain skills, craftsmen, things like that. And by the way, Jews are unique in history as being literate and numerate. We know how to count and we know how to read. The average rate of literacy up to 500 years ago was 1 in 1,000 people. And Jews are always very handy to rulers. I may not like you as a Jew, but boy, you're a great statesman, an accountant, an economic advisor, translator. Jews play a tremendous role in all of those things.
Okay.
So we are expanding as Jerusalem and Israel wanes, and the pressure economically, physically is not good there anymore. Jews are moving, and they keep moving. So
the Rishonim are now the leaders of the times, and we've spread all over Europe at this point.
So you have Islamic empires. By the way, Islam is not monolithic. It splits up and they fight amongst each other.
Okay.
Different kingdoms, Umayyads, Fatimids, Abbasids, Ayyubids, Mamelukes, all different groups appear throughout history and war with each other and conquer from each other. Europe, which is Christian Europe, is in what's called the medieval period, the Dark Ages. And there are Jews living there. People like Rashi is living 1,000 years ago in Troyes outside Paris. Mm-hmm. He's a Rishon, an Ashkenazi Rishon. The term Ashkenazi means Germany, but it's the term we generically use to describe Jews living in the Christian world. Mm-hmm. The term Sephardi means Spain, and it's a term we kind of use in the broad scope to describe Jews who lived in the Islamic world, but the real correct term is Edot HaMizrach, the communities of the East. That's the more correct term for Jews who lived in this Islamic world. Mm-hmm. But we use the term Sephardi because that little community, which was the end of the earth for Jews, to follow the Muslims out and cross the straits and go into Europe and start to settle in a very tolerant Islamic dynasty back then, this was the end of the world. What's amazing, and this is the whole story, is what is an outlier community back then will become the single biggest, most influential Jewish community in the world. You fast forward several hundred years later. Before you get to the 14th century and the beginning of mass anti-Jewish violence in Spain and Castile, and then the 15th century, the expulsion in 1492, ironically, what was America 200 years ago, no Jews there, no religious Jews there. Now it's the central Jewish diaspora community. This is what happens over and over again. This will become the golden age of Spain, where you have a tremendous amount of Torah scholarship and a unique aspect of Jewish history of rabbis who are not only great scholars in the field of Torah, people like the Rambam, mm-hmm. Maimonides, but the greatest doctor of their age, mm-hmm. the Ramban, the Levi ben Gershon. You have all these people who are great in mathematics and science and medicine and philosophy. This has never happened anywhere else in Jewish history, by the way. People are deeply rooted in Torah and deeply accomplished in other spheres.
That has not happened, you're saying?
No.
Right, I wanted to get that piece also, so that there is not the assimilation that we saw in other areas where it was kind of like, okay, we went to these places and became part of what they were. There's a commitment to Judaism and also a commitment to being successful in that society.
Yeah,
and Spain is the pinnacle of that. Is that happening in other places as well? Is that happening in England?
Spain is really, Jews they're used everywhere, but you don't have that level of anywhere else. You had a certain level of it and I'm sure probably in what is Iraq, Babylon, but we're not so aware of it. We're only aware of the great names of people who are so accomplished in so many different fields under a very tolerant Islamic dynasty. Unfortunately, the tolerant dynasty ends, more radical Muslims from North Africa, Berbers, the Almohadis come, that's when the Rambam, Maimonides and his family will flee. And then the Christians start to reconquer Spain, and in 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella of Castile and Aragon conquer Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in southern Spain, and the Alhambra decree of March 31st, 1492, he gives the Jews until July 31st. The Jews are given, until then, you either convert or you get out. Already, probably half the Jews in Spain have already converted to Christianity or left. Mm-hmm. So what was a huge population of maybe 500,000, which is huge. 1,000 years ago, there was maybe 1 million Jews in the world, and probably half of them may have been living in Spain. We don't realize how small the Jewish population shrank.
Right. From
6 to 8 million Jews at the height before the destruction of the Roman Empire and all that stuff, to shrivel down to almost nothing.
Wow.
But 1,000 years ago, the language that was spoken by almost all Jews, first language is Arabic. Ashkenazi, which is almost all the Jews of the world today, especially in America, were teeny tiny, few tens of thousands, mostly in Germany, Italy, and then moving up to Germany and southern France. That's the Ashkenaz world. And then the whole Middle East and going out through the Levant to Turkey and up through North Africa and into Spain. That's all the Edot HaMizrach, the Eastern communities.
Is the source of that, you mentioned Christians and Islam, is it religious attack on the Jews? Is that what it is? It's like, you're wrong?
It's often coming from, some spiritual, or Jews are too powerful, too much money. We need money now. A great way of getting money in medieval Europe was just like raid the Jews, expel them and take all their property. Or if we owe them money, Jews were always involved in money lending because they were forced into it. and Christians were not allowed to do it. And if a king didn't want to pay his debts to his Jewish moneylender who lent him a lot of money to finance a war, let's just accuse them of killing a Christian baby, use their blood to make matzah. We can expel them all and cancel the debts, and I'll take them all over, which is what happened in England with Edward I and the expulsion of the Jews.
Got it. And I when I think sometimes of like Jews in Poland, I think of some level of poverty. Were Jews economically successful outside of Spain during this time also?
Any place there are Jews, there was always, with one exception, which is Tsarist Russia. But every place that I know of in history where Jews moved to, it's because a combination of two factors, which again, we can't go into details of. Things fall apart here. In Western Europe, you start having 12th century, 13th century, 14th, 15th centuries expulsions of Jews from, you get from England first, then from France. Some of these countries are not unified, like Germany, so you have different parts of Germany expel the Jews. Sometimes the Jews are invited back in. My family, Spiros from Speyer. Bishop Rudiger of Speyer 1,000 years ago says, wishing to make Speyer into a city, I invited in Jews. This is a classic model. He didn't like Jews, but Jews were such a dynamic force, being literate and numerate and into commerce and having connections all over the world, in terms of business and being able to communicate. Ashkenazi Jews with Sephardic Jews. They may not have spoken Hebrew as a spoken language, but they can communicate back and forth. We want Jews in. He wanted to build a cathedral, invite in Jews, and Jews come. But fast forward 300 years later in Speyer, and the Jews are expelled twice in 1 century, and in the city of Mainz on the Rhine, 5 times in 1 century. They're expelled and invited back, expelled and invited back. This is a pattern which I'm just giving you one example to zoom in on. If we can't live with them, we can't live without them.
Right.
We don't like them. And Christianity is always more, Islam has been more tolerant, less violent. There have been periods of massive Islamic explosion of violence against Jews, but Christianity is definitely the darker, deeper, more violent.
Wow.
Attacks have come from the Christian world. But what you see is, if you follow what we've been talking about, Jews in Israel, Egypt to Israel, then you have destruction of First Temple, you have establishment of the first diaspora community, and a smattering of Jews elsewhere. Second Temple, as things in Israel deteriorate. Around the Mediterranean basin, Jews are scattered around economic opportunities. But as the Jerusalem ceases to be the central community and Babylon wanes, then you have the growth of the movement of the Jewish world into Spain as the central community. This is only a little over 500 years ago, 1492. That's gone. Those Jews who choose not to convert will pour back into North Africa and the Middle East. They'll come back to Jerusalem and they'll come to Sfat. They'll go into Italy. They'll often overwhelm the Jewish populations that lived there previously. Mixing back in with them. That's why a lot of Syrian Jewish friends that I have in Brooklyn are actually trace their ancestry back to Spain. And they went back to Aleppo and Damascus. But what happens with the Ashkenazi Jewish world is interesting. That's the zenith of Sephardic Jewry. That's when most of the Jews are speaking Arabic, and the center of Jewish scholarship and Jewish creativity is going to be in the Arabic-speaking world of Spain. Mm-hmm. With the collapse of that world, a lot of those Jews who are Sephardic Jews will also come into Europe. They'll move into Germany. They'll join with the Ashkenazi community, which begins in Italy. A lot of them were slaves that were sold during the Great Revolt. The Romans dumped thousands of Jewish slaves into the slave markets. Josephus, the historian, writes that Jewish slaves were cheaper than horses. There were so many of them. There was a glut in the market.
Wow.
By the way, genetically, until today, Ashkenazi Jewish men, of whom you and I are both, are genetically 45 to 75% Italian.
Wow.
Because that explains the interbreeding of Jewish men marrying non-Jewish women. They convert, of course, otherwise it wouldn't be Jewish today. But that Jewish community, with the advent of the Holy Roman Empire, which is around the year 800, Charlemagne, we all know Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor, he invites Jews into Germany because we need them. We want to set up an empire. We need people who are literate and numerate and bring in trade. So this is the growth of what's called Ashkenaz, which means Germany. So that community is quite small. When we get to the 12th century, we get to 1095, the 11th century, that is the First Crusade, called in Clermont in France by Pope Urban II to liberate Constantinople and Jerusalem. Okay. And that is when a mob of basically peasants just goes through Europe and destroys the Jewish communities of Germany. This is the beginning. Until then, Jews were doing relatively well. This is again a huge topic, but every place Jews lived, there was no such thing as citizenship in most of these countries. But they were given a charter by the bishop, the local lord, or a king, if there was a king. Mm-hmm. Meaning you Jews will do the X, Y, and Z, You will live in this area. We will grant you these privileges and rights and protection. You will pay these taxes. You will supply us with this. These charters are fascinating, by the way. And the better the deal, the more likely Jews would move in there. But what we see during this period of time from 1000 to about the year 1500 is the collapse of all of Western Europe as a safe haven for Jews. Expelled from Spain, expelled from France, expelled from all the different, Germany doesn't become a country until the late 19th century, unified, but all the different areas of Germany, expelled from England first. And where did Jews start to migrate into? As early as the 13th century, Poland. King Casimir of Poland, Boleslav. Poland and Lithuania, these are like in the 1600s, the largest country in Europe will be the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And they will invite Jews. We got to go somewhere. We're being thrown out of here, thrown out of here, thrown out of here, thrown out of here. And that population will explode from like 50,000 Jews in the 15th century to 500,000 Jews in 1700 to 5.5 million Jews in the late 19th century.
Wow, wait, so let me, a couple questions here. So you've shared kind of Jews pursued economic opportunity and also places welcomed Jews in because of economic upside. The reason they're kicking them out at this point is religious or economic as well. They feel like they got what they wanted and they're saying, what's the reason?
Again, it varies from place to place, but like I said, they can't live with us, they can't live without us. Things are going good.
Because of economic reasons or because of...
Sometimes sometimes
theological still?
Jews are scapegoated, sometimes it's not as, two things can be true at once.
Yes.
Often, like what we're going to say is these Jews kidnapped a Christian baby, used their blood to bake matzah, or brought the Black Death to Europe, but what we really want is we want them out so that we can loot and pillage their property. Right. Or in Tsarist Russia, the government's corrupt and everyone's on the verge of revolting, but rather than attack the government and trigger a revolt, blame the Jews, go get drunk, beat up and rape, and pillage their towns and villages in the shtetl, and you'll feel better after your hangover and you'll blow off some steam.
Right, so I want to bring you back to your, we spoke in the beginning of part one of this, that kind of the Jewish goal was to bring monotheism to the world, and Jews are successful when they follow the laws vertically and horizontally, and when they mess up, they get kicked out. Fast forward, we're now like in the, I guess, the second millennium, is that what you call the, from 1000 to 1500, Is that still feel like it's the Jewish mission when you look on it then? Are they doing that work in that same way? And also, and are they getting expelled for misbehaving in the same way they do in biblical times?
I mean, first of all, I have to be a prophet to really answer that question.
Right. I don't mean, sorry, I mean like years 1000 to 1500, the past, not the future.
But it's not just necessarily misbehaving, it's also getting too comfortable there. Like I said this, I can't say it enough. Right. God plays the long game there. You get too comfortable here. And it doesn't necessarily mean assimilating. Like Jews in Spain were not all assimilating. They were staying religious. They were very comfortable. Jews in Babylon in the Purim story in Persia. Too comfortable. They were religious. They weren't assimilating. Got to shake it up. Got to move you out. Sometimes they are also assimilating. So it's a combination of things. But it just we see that it never lasts. And the better it is, the worse it gets.
Right. Wait, and unpack to me a little bit the shake it up thesis. Are you saying that like, God is consistently acting in history, and God's concern is that even if people are following the law vertically and horizontally, they're in the wrong place? Is that what it is? They need to be in it? What is it?
Well, first of all, you can say following the law, you got to be careful here, but
right.
It's even though Maimonides doesn't include in the 630 commandments living in the land of Israel, it's because for him it would be insulting to say it, because this Maimonides says, better to live in a city in the land of Israel, it's 100% idolatrous as a religious Jew than to live in Borough Park or Williamsburg or Pico Robertson or Bathurst and something in Toronto. Or if you live outside the land of Israel, it's as if you have no God. So part of doing what we're supposed to be doing as Jews is being in the land of Israel. One of the big things, I always get in trouble for saying this, is the diaspora is a desecration of God's name. I'm not saying every Jew in diaspora is doing horrible things. It's a punishment. The problem with the punishment, when jail becomes really nice, you forget you're in jail. You're free to move around, but it's not where the Jewish people are supposed to be. This is so fundamental. It's like so basic to Judaism. So part of doing what we're supposed to be doing is basically is being in the land of Israel as a nation, not conquering the world, not converting, like I said before, but living as this unique nation. People are supposed to look at us and be inspired by how we're living in our little country over there. That is absolutely critical to understand. So that is always a theme that's going to play itself out, which again explains the weirdness. Since think about this, racism is generally caused by dislike of the different. you're black, I'm white. The more you become like me, the less I'll hate you till you assimilate. The irony is the exact opposite, that the greatest explosions of anti-Semitism have almost always taken place in places where Jews are most comfortable and often most like the non-Jews, whether it's Egypt 3,300 years ago or Jews in Germany before Hitler. That's not normal. That is really supernatural. Mm-hmm. But the message is really clear. So it could take, when I say God plays the long game, it could take thousands of years for us to get back. But we are literally, you and I are sitting in the middle of a conversation that's unfolded before our eyes in the last less than 80 years.
Got it. All right, well, let's catch up to that. Just give me, on
Okay.
one foot.
Okay.
1500 to 1900.
So then Jews.
What happens?
So Jews are in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
We all moved into Poland, you said.
Not all, but
And why did Poland welcome us?
because they needed Jews.
For economic reasons.
And for economic reasons,
Okay.
the Jews ran it's called the Arenda system. Jews ran the estates. Like Ukraine is colonized by the Poles. It's feudal estates. And the Jews were brought in as tax collectors, put us in a very bad position.
Got it.
We had to pay the Polish lord a certain amount of money. Anything we'd make over that, we could keep but who's the Ukrainian dealing with directly? The Jew.
Right.
Okay, that kind of thing. That did not endear us.
Okay.
In 1640 and 1649, there's a Cossack revolt, ostensibly against the Poles, but it's directed at the Jews, called the Khmelnytsky massacres, where 50 to 100,000 Jews are murdered in Eastern Europe. The massacres of Tach V'Tat, that goes according to the Hebrew years, which is, again, you see Poland is starting to unravel. But when we get to the 18th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth ceases to exist, and it's gobbled up by the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the West, and the expanding Russian Empire of Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. And this is the only case where there's no golden age, because Jews didn't migrate into Russia. The border moved, and this is common in Eastern Europe. I met a woman who said, I was born in Hungary, I grew up in Romania, and then I lived in Ukraine, and she never moved.
Right.
The borders moved around her as she went. So the Russians inherit what is most of the world Jewish population. Mm-hmm. That they didn't want. And that's a whole interesting topic of Tsarist Russia, all kinds of legislation and destroying us economically and putting pressure and forcibly drafting Jewish children into the Russian army and taxing them and robbing them of their... And it leads to the system that all of our, if you're Ashkenazic Jewish, which is pre-Holocaust, 90% of the Jews in the world, that's what it is. This is the story of things like coming to America, starting in the 1880s with the assassination of Alexander II, and the massive anti-Semitism that was unleashed by that event, which was blamed on the Jews. Millions of Jews start to flee Russia. That's the Fiddler on the Roof thing, with Tevye leaving at the end.
Got it. And so the second half of the previous millennium is totally different than the first half in terms of, at least what I hear you saying. In the first half, there was a lot of thriving economic opportunity. There were moments where we got kicked out and pulled back in, but with the move towards Poland and Ukraine and then being subsumed into Tsarist Russia, it's actually the quality of life goes down heavily.
Economically, it's a lot more hardship, it's a lot more difficult, but the center of the Jewish world, the creativity, look where the rabbis, if I could, like bright red, where all the rabbinic authority is. It's really it's in Lithuania, northeast Poland. All these yeshivot that we have today, the Mir and Panovich, and all these places are named after communities in Europe. Right. And by the way, the rabbis would have told you 100 years ago, the two places you're not allowed to go as a Jew, you're not allowed to go to America, the Golden Medina, which was a death trap spiritually for Jews because there was no Torah infrastructure. For Jews to live anywhere, you got to have rabbis and Torah and synagogues and Jewish education.
And Spain had that also.
Spain had it.
Right.
Spain developed it.
And then it lost, and then it got rebuilt in Lithuania.
Right. But they say, but initially Spain didn't have it.
Right.
But once some rabbis start to settle in these places, like southern France and Spain, then once the Torah infrastructure is there, then more Jews will move in and move in and move in. You look at where I'm staying now, Muncie. Yeah. Muncie was 100 years ago. There's no Jews living there.
Right.
Now it's one giant
shtetl.
That
was your thing. So what, America and Israel were the two places that you were
So that, ironically,
yeah.
Because this also corresponds, late 19th century is the birth of Zionism, which comes out of Eastern European Jews as a reaction of Eastern European Jews who are mostly assimilated Jews, who initially thought it would be great if we become more Russian, they'll hate us less. Mm-hmm. When that didn't work, a lot of them became either revolutionaries. Mm-hmm. The Russian Revolution was a Jewish orchestrated event, basically, in 1917, or Zionism, that the solution to all the garbage we're going through is we don't have a state. Mm-hmm. And so they will be the people who will... There's always Jews living in Israel, and the pre-Zionist influx of Jews that happens as poor Jews living in the old yeshuv, the old settlement, in places like Sfat and Hebron and Jerusalem, poor religious Jews. But then with the advent of Zionism, Jews starting in 1882 start to pour into the land of Israel, but it's basically being run by secular Jews who are often quite anti-religious. It's a very fascinating topic.
Right.
The pushback of the Orthodox world against Zionism until today, things like serving in the army, stuff all goes back to a debate which was happening starting in the late 19th century. But rabbis in Eastern Europe would say, look, it's not so good here in Eastern Europe. Politically, economically, it's unstable. They're not so nice to us. But we'll stay Jewish. If you go to those places, not good. By the way, we know that when the Napoleonic Wars, and he is, by the way, the general emperor who will conquer Europe and break down all the walls of the ghettos. Because we didn't mention Napoleon, but with the French Revolution in 1789 and the emancipation of Jews in France in 1791, and Napoleon reconfirming those rights in 1806 and 1807, Jews will finally be let out of ghettos and be able to, in theory, it varies from place to place, but this proves to be more dangerous to Jews than the greatest anti-Semitism. Loving Jews to death has been a bigger trap for us, not in terms of a physical threat, but a spiritual threat. Because Jews will, they can go to university now, I can be doctors and lawyers, I can be a politician, I can join the army, I can be part of this great culture that was Western Europe and Germany and Austria. And Jews will often run through that at the expense of their Judaism, whereas in Eastern Europe, which is under feudal Russia, there's none of that going on. And that's where most of the Jews are trapped. So the rabbis are saying, it's not so nice here, but poverty and oppression keeps Jews Jewish. Mm-hmm. Wealth and freedom destroys the Jewish people.
Wow.
It's always been the most toxic thing for us. So with the collapse, with what the anti-Semitism of Russia in the 19th century and the birth of Zionism, most of those Jews fleeing the Tsarist Russian persecution in what is today Poland, Ukraine, this was all part of the Russian Empire, 2.5 million will come to America through Ellis Island, which, by the way, is a wasteland spiritually. And most of those Jews will work in sweatshops 7 days a week. They'll stop keeping the Sabbath because they get fired if they take a day off.
Sure.
And it's a very famous line: "For more than the Jews kept the Sabbath kept the Jews." Jews stopped, and that's the story of my family. I'm not raised religious. Little by little, everything goes by the wayside, which leads to the massive assimilation of Jews in America today, and Jews start to come into Israel. I always say it's ironic. We fast forward today, and where do 90% of all the Jews in the world live? America and Israel.
Right.
Much to the shock of the rabbis of 100 years ago, saying, "Don't go there."
Right.
Because the final big event of all of this, of course, is the Holocaust. You know, Hitler comes to power after World War I is an incredibly destabilizing factor for Jews also, by the way.
Sure.
The Russian Revolution comes out of World War I. This massive slaughter of Jews in Russia during World War I and during the Russian Revolution. And that's the center of the Jewish world. By the way, a lot of that Jewish world is already not religious anymore. Jews are migrating into socialism and all these other things. New movements have been born. The Reform movement starts in Hamburg, Germany, 1811, to try and make a version of Judaism that will allow Jews to basically assimilate. It's not the reform of today, by the way. It was like, let's get rid of all the differences. Drop halacha, drop National Association of Israel, forget Jerusalem. No, we're Germans. So all these movements, and the conservative movement appears in 1886 in America. So now you have the birth of all these offshoots trying to deal with modernity outside the framework of rabbinic Judaism. And when Hitler comes along, think about it. The center of the Jewish world is still Eastern Europe, the center of the yeshiva world, and it's obliterated. 90% of Jews in Poland are killed. And that's over 3.5 million Jews living in Poland. And had Hitler been successful and gotten through Russia, there would be another 3 million Jews that he would have killed over there. So, but look at, you can go back, Justin, and see how the diaspora shut down. Closed, open, closed, open, closed, open, closed, open. Then Israel appears America. And then you have, the birth of a Jewish state. Dara Horn wrote a book called People Love Dead Jews.
Sure.
It's an interesting book, but the world, we get a lot more sympathy and support when we're dying. When we're winning, they're not so supportive of us. But I believe that it took 6 million Jews dying in the Holocaust to get the world to feel bad enough to vote November 29, 1947, 33-13 with 10 abstentions in Flushing Meadow in Queens to partition Palestine, which was then under British control. That's what happened after World War I. The Ottoman Empire collapses.
Sure.
The British get hold of the Middle East, and the French, they create the modern Middle East of today. All these countries, except for Egypt and Persia, everything in the middle, including Israel, is a modern recreation of the British and the French. The British say, we want out, enough already. And the UN votes to partition Palestine. And 5 months later, May 14th, 1948, that's what happens. But you think about it, in 1900, half of 1% of the Jews in the world lived in Israel. Today, at least half the Jews in the world are living in Israel. In 1900, one Jew spoke Hebrew as his first language, Eliezer ben Yehuda, who is the person credited with the resurrection of modern Hebrew. His kid was the only kid who spoke Hebrew as a first language. I always say he had a terrible childhood, no play dates, he couldn't talk to anyone. Today, Hebrew is spoken by an estimated at least 7 million people in Israel. More than 7, 11 million people. I've heard some crazy number of people who know or speak Hebrew today. And Israel alone has more than 7 million Jews living in it now. So it's an amazing story.
Sure. Wait, so our last few minutes, I want to ask you a couple of big questions just to bring it all together. I want to ask you, certainly everyone's trying to make, feels like a moment in history. Obviously, October 7th feels like a moment in history. How do you see that moment fitting into the larger picture? And then I also want to give you the opportunity to talk about how, where you see this history unfolding in the future.
Since October 7th, which was, in my opinion, I was saying this before October 7th, the infighting within Israel, because the establishment of Israel doesn't mean the Messiah is here. There's a tremendous amount of infighting, and the transformation that Israel's gone through from the secular Zionist worldview to a state that is very much moved towards being traditional and to the right, and what's going on with the Supreme Court battles and everything. I was watching this going on. I lived in Israel 43 years. I was saying, because I got my history hat on, when one of the great patterns we see is when we start fighting amongst ourselves, whether it's in Jerusalem in the Second Temple period before the Romans come, or today, it's God sitting in heaven saying, my children, you want to kill each other? I can't stand to watch. I'm going to send non-Jews to do it. Boom, October 7th, everyone stops fighting, everyone unifies, and we've got a common enemy. Of course, fast forward now, it's 601 days since the hostages were taken hostage now. And you fast forward, and you see we're back to, the infighting started again. So that's a big lesson, but it's been a huge wake-up call for a lot of Jews in diaspora, even Jews who are minimally affiliated. I'm Jewish in name alone, but now people are coming after me, or I'm feeling threatened, because they're not saying Zionism is racism, they're talking about gassing Jews and we hate Israel and attacking JCCs in America and synagogues. What does that have to do with Israel? And like I always say that anti-Zionism is the final excuse that anti-Semitism hides behind. We didn't get into why it really caused anti-Semitism, but it just masks itself behind many different faces, but ultimately it always goes back to one very specific message, which is lost on most of the world and most Jews. But that, we watch, like I said, I'm not a prophet. If I was, I'd be working in Wall Street, like I always say. But the diaspora is being shut down. And I always say that America's the last stop. When North America closes down, there ain't going to be Jews moving to all. Doesn't mean every Jew is coming to Israel, but the vast majority of Jews, they end up back in the land of Israel. That's what sounds impossible, but if you took a Jew 100 years ago and told them, it took Herzl in 1909.
Right. So why is America the last stop? Why isn't it like something else will open? Maybe South America will be the big center of Jewish life, or China or something.
Yeah, because you see, first of all, things in place, because now we have Israel back, and you see the explosion. It's gone up. The explosion of the population in Israel has gone up like 1,100% is the population growth of Israel in 75 years, which is 3 times what the world has done. And you see that unlike in the ancient world, where what goes on in Spain didn't affect Russia, with the nature of the way the world is interconnected. Like Mark Twain said, a lie gets halfway around the world before truth has time to tie its shoes. And he said this way before the internet. Today, the anti-Semitism, it's not like there's a golden place for Jews there and here is, no, it's only bad and less worse. And it really is, it's simmering under the surface. I'm not saying it's going to be another Holocaust in the United States. I do not know these things. But when you stand back and you look at the big picture and you understand the director, which is why it's called his story, and what's going on and what the rules of the game are and the patterns that are established in Jewish history, it's inexorably moving towards that. You just see. But when you're in the middle of big events, you often don't know, you don't really see them. And especially when you're a Jew who doesn't have any knowledge of their history, and doesn't realize there's rules to the game. We're in a story. We're the protagonists. We have a unique role to play. And like the little superhero, whether it's Harry Potter or Luke Skywalker, we can't escape our destiny. Our role is too significant in this world. I always say being Jewish might not be comfortable, but it's always meaningful.
What does God want from us? I heard you say, keep the vertical laws, keep the horizontal laws, don't fight with each other, move back to Israel. Did I capture it?
I think the first thing he wants, oh God, if I'm wrong, let me know. I think the first thing he wants is for us to get along with each other. Okay, that's number one. We have to make a paradigm shift to focus on what we have in common, because Hitler didn't care about what kind of Jew you were. There's no different lines in Auschwitz: Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, left-wing, right-wing, Republican, Democrat. Anti-Semites look at us all as Jews. We have to look at each other as Jews. We don't have to agree with everything, but it's like family. You're my brother, you're my sister. I don't have to like you, but I gotta love you. If we just lower that tone down and be more inclusive, and I'm primarily focusing on the Orthodox Jewish world, which has, because of this incredible process of being punished and benched and smashed and thrown out, has become so reactive and so self-insular. And it's kind of self-ghettoized. That's the last thing that God wants. He wants us first and foremost to be unified. And I think Rav Chaim of Volozhin, he said it the best. He was a great European rabbi from the beginning of the 19th century. He said, when Jews don't make Kiddush, Gentiles make Havdalah. And he doesn't mean literally the Kiddush ceremony on Friday night, and we go to the higher level of Shabbat on a cup of wine, versus the Havdalah ceremony on Saturday night, and we also on a cup of wine and we go down. He says, when we individually and collectively do not fulfill our mission as a nation, which is to take that incredible body of wisdom called the Torah and put it in the hardware, which is the Jewish people, which is an incredible transformative powerhouse in human history. How can 0.2% of the world's population have 22% of all the Nobel Prizes since 1901? Jewish people are just boom. But when we don't use that wisdom and what we have as a nation in a unified way to bring the world what it really wants, which is just a formula on how to make the world run properly. The world is looking for role models who are not actors, actresses, athletes, musicians. Some of these people are nice, but they're not we're supposed to be humanity's role models. When we don't fill the world and you can't represent the Jewish people till you know what Judaism represents. You can't be ignorant. You have to learn. We're all on different rungs of a ladder. It doesn't, because you're higher up doesn't mean you're better, because you wear a bigger, blacker hat than me or keep more kosher. I know people who are lower rungs in terms of observance who are very holy people. I know people on very high rungs who look very Jewish who are not very holy. It's a matter of unity, and in whatever level we're at, being educated and unified Jews, and putting some of that effort and some of the money and all the things we do for the world into being Jews for Judaism, because we make the most amazing role models for the human race. And the world's not going to leave us alone until we do that. Beautiful.
Just explain the metaphor. What does it mean that Gentiles make Havdalah? What does that mean?
That when we don't fill the world, Aristotle said, nature abhors a vacuum. When we don't fill the world with values that come from value of life, peace. The first book I wrote, World Perfect, is just on the transformative impact of monotheism on morality and government. Values of life, peace, proactive social responsibility, equality before the law. These are ideas that came from us, directly or indirectly through the evolution of democracy and Western liberalism. The world will be full of the opposite values. The opposite values happen to be dark and evil. And when that evil comes into the world, it comes after us first, which is why you can measure how a country is doing by how it treats its Jews in terms of its democracy and rights.
So Havdalah represents the opposite of Kiddush.
The opposite, making it dark.
Negative.
When we don't fill the world with light, the world's going to be dark, and the darkness is going to come after us first. We're like canary in the coal mine, as Dennis Prager likes to call us.
All right, we were way out of time. I just want to say thank you. I learned so much over these two sessions. I hope others did as well. And I hope you are right that we can find a way to be the shining light that you're describing, and starting with getting along with each other and being curious about each other.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת שכיב